Welcome to the Dirty Side of Leadership podcast with Ron and Kristin, where leadership meets entertainment. This podcast features stories with names and certain aspects that have been changed to keep submissions private. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to episode 76 of the Dirty Side of Leadership podcast, where leadership meets entertainment. I'm Kristin, and as always, I'm joined by my amazing co-host who once saved 10 kittens from a burning building and helped an old lady across the street 3 times, and best-selling author Ron Ward. And since Ron writes his own intro, today's episode might be very helpful for him. On this episode, we are going to address resume padding.
Oh, yeah, that sounds timely. Kristin, there's a difference in padding a resume and a podcast intro. I'm just saying.
But is there?
Okay. You guys know that we talk a lot about childhood programming and the impact that it has even into adulthood. Usually embellishing starts at a very early age, and parents have to be aware of this. But think about it. When you embellish, you impress your friends. It makes you look good. You get that attention for that moment. So it's kind of a cool thing. And therefore, some people more than others have to be taught ethics. And that's why it is so important to catch that when people are younger, because it can really become a part of your fabric. Your psychology is that I'm just going to fudge this a little bit because things are going to work out better for me. And eventually you don't even have guilt. So, Kristin, I do have a story.
Yeah, let's do it.
I mean, a question. Sorry about that.
Oh,
have
yeah.
you ever embellished? I set
you know,
up.
it's funny. As I was reading through this, I was like, gosh, you know what I have done? And not necessarily embellishing, but like my husband is a penny pincher and I am not. And I found myself, we've been married 16, almost 17 years. And I do find myself unnecessarily rounding down what I've spent on things. Like even groceries, I'm like, oh, you know, it was like $3.50 and it's like $4.50. You know what I mean? And it's like, duh, we share a joint account. But like my knee jerk with him is to, I guess, to round down. And it's so unnecessary, but it stems from at one point when he would be like, that's crazy. That grocery amount is crazy. I'm like, do you know what kind of economy we're in? So anyhow, that's going to, at least at present time, I've noticed myself doing that. Would you say that's an embellishment or a white lie?
Both,
Make me feel
Kristin.
better. An under embellishment.
Listen, it's not quite saving 10 kittens from a burning building, but
No, it's not.
No, I see why you do it. And I thought back on this and I couldn't remember, like I don't remember specifics, but I'm sure I exaggerated. You know, there's fishing stories. That's one of the early jokes about, you know, I caught a fish so big, the picture weighed 5 pounds. But I do remember the pressure, and this is so terrible. And I don't hear this from kids now, but I wouldn't, I'm sure. But we used to talk about like, what base did you get to, you know, first, second base, like on a date. And I can remember the pressure, like if you chickened out and didn't kiss a girl and they're asking you and then you end up embellishing like, well, of course I kissed her. When you really didn't. Right. So I do remember that pressure, which is funny, but there really was that first, second, third base kind of talk in school. And
absolutely.
I know that there was a lot of embellishment.
Yeah. You know what's funny is I remember something like that being said about me by a guy that like merely had a crush on me in high school. It's like, heard you made out with him. I'm like, no. And didn't talk to him again after that because I'm like, that's just ridiculous. But yeah, that absolutely happens.
To all those women out there that I'd like to take this moment to apologize.
Oh my gosh. For those watching, Ron is drinking out of a mug that I am under the impression he purchased for himself. And it says world's best boss ever.
You know, Kristin, I feel like I'm starting to look bad on this podcast.
And if it wasn't you, I'd like to know who bought it for you.
So is the part that bothers you the fact that it says ever or just world's best boss?
Well, the ever really hits it home. You know, it's just like ever. Because world's best boss reminds me of The Office, Michael Scott, where he said he bought it at, what was that store in the mall? Oh, goodness. It's one that like everyone has in the malls.
Yeah,
But
I know the one you're
anyways,
talking about.
Dang it. But he bought it there. Which
I do
made
have a
it just
love-hate
so
relationship with
funny.
my boss, for the record. But
Yeah. Oh, goodness. All right. So now let's begin with resume padding, which means adding false or exaggerated information to your resume. Oh my gosh. I saw the best meme, and it was on Instagram, and it said, "No one can ever deny that you were the regional executive of Blockbuster." And it named off all these companies that are no longer around.
I saw that. That's a perfect. If you're listening, you want to embellish, use a company that closed down.
Who's there to go check records? What else is there? You could do Blockbuster. Everyone's going to put like regional executive for Blockbuster. Yeah. Oh my gosh. There were a few others that just recently closed, but that was hysterical. So, that one, hey, go for it. There's no one that's going to fact check you on that one. But resume padding, like I was saying, it's false or exaggerated information. It could be someone that back in the day, they worked the register at Blockbuster, but hey, they're going to put that they were the regional manager, right? So you're enhancing your credentials for a job, basically. And so despite the fact that resume padding often goes unnoticed, which is kind of wild to me, but I can see how it does, 69% of hiring managers reported that they caught job candidates lying on their resumes. And this was in a 2010 Hire Right study of over 1,800 companies. So that's wild in itself. And that's a really interesting study. I think that happens a lot more than we realize. I personally do not recall ever finding that someone had lied on their resume, but I'm sure you have, Ron.
No, we didn't find blatant lies. There's some things, semantics plays a part, like how you word something. I love this commercial. These two guys are talking, and one guy asks the other, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" He goes, "I work for a food distribution center. And I'm my own boss." And this person is like, "Wow, that's really cool. What's the name of the company?" And he says, "DoorDash." And he goes, "You mean DoorDash?"
You love it. Oh my God, DoorDash.
So sometimes it's how you word things.
Oh my gosh, I love that.
I literally did. One time I was helping my daughter with her resume, and she was straight out of Christian school. And I'm like, "Well, tell me anything. Did you volunteer one day? Didn't you help someone that one day?" And I worded things, and she was like, "Wow, Dad, I look important on this resume." So
I love it.
There are ways to word things that will help, but you have to be careful when that wording becomes untrue.
Right.
And, we're going to talk more about that because it can be a little devastating.
Right. Because like what you're saying is more of an exaggeration, maybe, or just a rewording. But so an exaggeration and embellishment, two different things.
I like to think of it as more academic, what I did,
Yeah, there you go.
I made it more academic.
You massaged the word.
Remember, you talk about The Office a lot. Dwight always wanted to be the assistant regional manager. Michael would always correct him and say assistant to the regional manager. Yes, the best. It was a big difference.
Oh, my goodness. All right, now let's get into basics. Your resume is one of the most common screening tools used by companies to evaluate your credentials when applying for a job. Most of us know that. It typically includes your objectives, your education, work experience, and other activities and honors that support your qualifications. So education is the area which people lie the most, and that's according to resumepower.com, to the founder and director, Kim Isaacs. So that's kind of wild. I was told, Ron, I don't know about you, but I was like scared into telling the truth early on, because I remember working for banks, that if the bank found out that you had said you had a degree and it was found to be untrue, that it was an immediate termination. I remember either that was a rumor or it was the truth, but I was like, I'm not gonna exaggerate anything, especially in that realm. But
listen, I can't overstate the background investigation. The FBI did mine.
Yeah.
And so there was no room for that at all, because they pull every single record. So,
and it makes sense at your level and then at the bank as well, because you're dealing with people's money and you have access. You have a lot of power right there.
Very true.
Yeah, that makes sense. So people without a degree, for instance, have indicated that they have one. And then through the background investigation, it's been found that people didn't have one. And so that just sends all sorts of red flags when they're doing this onboarding or this background investigation before you even get hired. Candidates also exaggerate job titles. I was just kind of poking fun at doing that with the Blockbuster, but exaggerating job titles and work activities, as well as volunteer work and civic involvement. So I could really see how all of that could be manipulated or massaged and to sound a lot better than it really is, or kind of take you a little bit away from the truth.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. And some of those things, volunteer work, it's very hard to verify, and people know that. So any type, and they will tell you this when you're trying to get into Harvard, Yale, these parents have their kids doing volunteer work early on to pad the resume. I'm not sure, some of them may be doing it for the right reasons, but that's some of the things that people do. And they also do that to pad the resume for a job. And I mean, it works. I'm not saying that, I'm not placing judgment on it, but it happens.
Yeah.
Now, in this research, Kristin, we found an interesting story. And resume padding happens at all levels of employment. We've said that, as indicated by the Hire Right survey. While more often associated with frontline employees, former Yahoo CEO Scott Thompson was forced to resign his position on May 13, 2012, after shareholders and company leaders became aware that his degree was inaccurate on his resume.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. In her May 2012 CNN article, Resume Padding, Inconsequential or Inexcusable, Amalia Grinberg noted that false reports of advanced degrees, such as MBAs, are common. Kristin, in that moment, it would really scare me to fake a degree.
Yeah.
Now, something quick and funny for our audience. I got my master's degree at Mountain State University, and it later went solvent or lost its accreditation.
I don't know why that's funny, but okay.
It worried me because I checked with them. It was over one of the medical courses. But the guys, when I first went to the academy, they were giving me a hard time. They were going, Ron got his master's degree at Mountain State University. So
that no longer exists.
I just shut it down. I looked at them and I said, let me tell you something, guys. It was the toughest weekend of my life. So anyway.
That would be super interesting to have gotten your degrees from somewhere that's no longer.
I started making phone. I had someone send me a news article that says Mountain State closes its doors.
Oh my goodness.
And due to lack of accreditation, you can imagine, panic set in, and I'm calling everywhere trying to find out, is my degree even valid?
Oh my goodness. So it turns out it is, right?
Well, I'm certainly not going to say it's not on this podcast.
Oh, wow. That's crazy. All right. So let's talk about motivation here. And, before, I think we didn't really talk about this in the intro. What inspired this entire episode is Tim Waltz, who has been he's Kamala's VP, right?
Yeah.
He has been found to be, let's say, embellishing his military history or service, right? And we're going to go into that. But that's really what inspired this, is because they're really working with a little bit of a mess here. They're trying to clean up the internet. The Kamala's team is. So I don't know, Ron, if you want to touch on that now, or we can go into it later on. But that is what inspired us.
We can go ahead, and
I think we should.
We talk about motivation, and you get that little bit of a dopamine drip when you're exaggerating and you're getting that attention. And who knows about Tim Walz, if this is something that he did early in childhood, but we certainly know that politicians, and I will say this on both sides, embellish. Kristin and I found a study early on, if you guys remember, that it's believed that over 70% of all U.S. presidents were narcissists, or they at least were in the spectrum of narcissism. Right. So people embellish to get better jobs, but they also embellish to get elected. And regardless of the spin, and Kristin, you're going to find this interesting. When I Googled this story, the headings were VP presidential candidate Vance attacks VP
Oh my gosh.
presidential.
Yeah, they're really wiping it.
Tim Waltz. Then they said overstates or inappropriate. They interviewed some of the military and said it's inappropriate for one military serviceman to attack another. So I just started laughing when I started reading the headlines. There was not a headline like Tim Waltz obviously exaggerated his military service. You didn't see that. So that's the age we live in. People, if you're Googling stuff, you better be aware of that because you're going to get a spin on the story. So what Kristin is talking about is basically Tim Walz said that he carried a gun in war. Now, there's a big difference in being a combat sergeant major than being a sergeant major. And from everything legitimate research, it appears that he did not take the actual classes. I think he started to pursue that to be a command sergeant, which is different, but he didn't complete the courses. And we know that before the Iraqi war, we won't get into that, but he retired. And that seems to be the story. But who would think, and remember this, if you're young and listening, you may be vice president one day. You don't want to exaggerate that resume because that's, that has come back to haunt him in a major way, and it's not going away.
Right.
Now, of course, there's going to be people overlook it, but it's not going away. What do you think?
Yeah, no, not at all. And I know what people are doing because they are scrubbing the internet, and which is scary if you think about it. You can literally, they have the power to scrub the truth history from the internet, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what's happening. And so luckily, a lot of people I know are doing screenshots. So when they first jumped right on researching him, they took a screenshot of everything. And then now they have a before and after it's been scrubbed, right? And you know where else they've been scrubbing is they're removing J.D. Vance's accreditations. And so a lot of people have the before and after of all of his achievements in the military, and then the after, because they've also scrubbed and removed those. And so it's really important when you're doing research like that to, especially if it's early on, you're hitting it right after a story drops or something like that. You take a screenshot, and so you have that receipt that it existed, because likely if it doesn't look good, it will be scrubbed. So yeah, it's absolutely wild. Something like that happened here in Washington. I'm not in Washington State, but just right over the Columbia River here in Washington State. So I'm friends with Semi Bird, ran for governor, the gubernatorial candidate for Washington State, and he did not make it through primaries. One of the things that really hurt him was there were rumors that he had stolen Valor, and that he just couldn't come back from those rumors. Yeah. And I'm not a military expert by any means, so I stayed out of that. I don't understand the small details within that. But I do find it, for him, he provided a lot of, I guess you would say, as they like to say these days, receipts or evidence, right? That was not the case. But once that rumor got cooking, it really hurt him in his campaign. So that type of stuff happens at all levels.
I remember how beautiful it used to be that you could Google something and you remember when you were innocent, when
thought it was gospel,
like everything I ever need to know in the history of the world is at my fingertips. Right. And now that I've been enlightened and realized what's happening, and even researching this, Kristin, I'm telling you, regardless of what you think about it, and I've seen this on both sides, but when I read this, Vance is the villain in my Google research. Think about that, because he brought to attention the allegations of stolen valor. So instead of looking at the behavior, now I finally, I kept scrolling down. I did find the embellishment, but I'm saying in the first several articles, it makes Vance the villain, and it made Waltz the victim. So, folks, we've talked a lot about this, or we have spoken about this before, but I talk about the importance of doing background investigations. And what I mean by that is in today's world, a lot of times you can't get information like companies will only put start date and end date. Doesn't tell you why they left, how they left, or any of the details. But there is nothing that stops you from asking for references and calling and asking open-ended questions, but also asking direct questions. Would you hire this person? Has this person been honest? Have you ever seen this person be dishonest? Those kind of things, and validate what the resume says. And I actually had one situation where there was some, let me say, misinformation. It turns out it was more of a perspective thing, the way it was framed, but it still gave me enough hesitancy to worry about hiring someone. So it is so vital. And, you know, everyone talks about the presidential nominees and vice president. They're vetted and they do a pretty intense job. But the way this one evolved so quickly when President Biden steps out, VP Harris steps in.
He was pushed out, but
they didn't have time. They didn't have time to vet, I'm sure, because that's a pretty big error to miss.
Right. Oh, absolutely. Well, I heard that 12 people turned down the opportunity before Terry said, sorry, I keep saying Terry. He looks like a Terry to me. Before Tim said, yes, 12 people. This is just hearsay. I don't have receipts for this one, but that he was finally the person that said, let's do it. So, yeah, they didn't really have a chance. They're like, we're going to number 13. So I guess we didn't have a chance to vet that far down the list. But, pretty wild. So I want to just talk about motivation here. We have mentioned childhood programming and how it gives us that dopamine drip when people admire us. I mean, just look at social media, right? Everyone like lives for these likes and views and all of that. But as adults, the general motivation for resume padding is improving your chances of getting the job you want, especially in highly competitive job markets. Employees will rationalize these little white lies or exaggerated claims as acceptable. And they typically look past the potential repercussions, like we're talking about now, and hope the hiring manager doesn't catch the inaccuracy. And in some instances, padded resumes do result from honest mistakes. Some instances, someone could state that they have a Bachelor of Science, which maybe they have a Bachelor of Arts. Some people hire resume writing services to prepare their resumes, and errors may occur. You should always look at it yourself and ensure that, that it's good to go after they've done that. But I'm sure honest mistakes can and have happened. The writer could accidentally list their GPA as 3.9 instead of 3.09. I don't know. Yes, you could transpose the numbers, I guess. But for instance, it's ultimately the candidate's responsibility to review the resume for accuracy. And then the hiring manager needs to do their due diligence as well. So yes, we are human. We can make mistakes. But when it's your resume, you should be reading that over 5-6 times before you're actually sending it out.
No, it's very true. And we went back to, I don't want to harp on this too much, but when we talked about Tim Walz, you can embellish things on a resume with maybe not as many repercussions, but if you were to actually put in a document that you held rank, it's illegal. Now, no one has alleged that other than statements that Tim Walz made about, his military service. So I don't think it gets into legal charges, but it's very interesting.
Yeah, it is.
Let's end with consequences, which is the perfect time based on what's happening.
Yeah.
But from an individual standpoint, there's nothing worse than being caught in a lie. Like you said, this guy lied about you. I don't know if you confronted that person, but I actually had one time.
I'm talking about in high school?
Yeah.
No, I just ghosted him.
Yeah. I had this happen. I can't believe I'm sharing this, but I had met another author and we had corresponded a few times on Instagram, very professional. Just this person had some information I needed. And so the next thing I know, I get a angry husband saying, "Why have you been contacting my wife?"
Yikes.
But here's the good feeling, Kristin. I knew, as a matter of fact, it took me a while to even remember who this person was. This person was irrelevant to me. But I remember the good feeling of knowing, I don't know where this bozo is getting information, but it's certainly, he's got the wrong guy. And I literally said that. I said, hey, bud, I don't know what's going on with your marriage, but you've got the wrong guy. But what I didn't realize, he explained in text that she had the disappearing, what's it called in Instagram?
Oh, yes. What is that?
So my name was there, but the messages had disappeared. And I just said, well, sorry about that. And there may be something you need to look into, but you got the wrong guy.
Right.
And, but also, I don't remember specifics, but I know I've gotten caught in lies before. I'm sure I have in school or something else, maybe cheating on something. But there's nothing worse than getting caught in a lie. And it, like you're caught hands down. Now, in today's world, this is the biggest change that I've seen. They can have you on video and you just go, yeah, that's not me. Apparently, you can just get your way out of anything. But
yes, I've heard that with the, like speeding tickets where they take your picture.
Yeah.
They can just say, thankfully we don't really have those around here, but yeah, you can just say that wasn't me. And they're like, okay. Like, how is that? Okay. Oh, goodness.
Now, back to the Yahoo CEO that we mentioned. What happened there was once they believed that he had lied about his degree, Thompson was forced out largely based on pressure from Third Point CEO Dan Loeb, whose company owned 5.8% of Yahoo at the time. Thompson's supporters argued that the longtime CEO had already proven his credentials with his work. Plus, his error was simply showing a bachelor's degree in accounting and computer science rather than his actual Bachelor of Science degree in business administration with a major in accounting. Loeb and other critics indicated that retaining a top manager who padded his resume sets a terrible tone for the ethical nature of the company. How about that, Kristin? What message did that send had they done nothing?
Yeah, it's true. They basically put kind of like what I have this story from someone getting fired at the bank, right? For putting the wrong degree, and they went through backgrounds and they were let go. So it definitely sends a strong message that you don't do that. And so, yes, unfortunately, we've talked about this before. Sometimes you have to, someone is going to be used as the messaging, right? Someone's going to be let go for something. And, once everyone else sees that someone's held accountable, they straighten up and they ensure that they don't go in that direction.
Kristin, just some final thoughts. What advice would you give younger people who are really wanting to, advance their career in regards to resumes and things like that? What would you tell them?
Yeah, I think that it's important that if you don't have enough honest skills, right? If you look back and you take an inventory of what you do bring to the table and there are some gaps, you can so easily build that out by going and volunteering in your community. Like that's something that you could so quickly be able to fill in and do it honestly. So for instance, if someone wants to go into the CPA or the accounting area, route, and they don't have a lot of, maybe they're working retail right now, which is some cash handling, right? But you could go volunteer to help people with their books, their bookkeeping. You could do, like a church or a nonprofit. Right. And then you have that hands-on and you have that community service. So you're checking a few boxes right there. And these are some people need volunteers everywhere. And so this is something that you could build your resume. If you just pause for 2 weeks and actually fill that gap in, you can honestly add something to your resume very, very quickly. You just have to action it. So I think that's important. And Ron, I'm curious about something. I read a LinkedIn articles. Some of them are fantastic. Some of them are a little questionable. I read one recently and it basically said, for everyone who is putting manager or was a manager, replace that with director. And they're saying basically that's the new way to frame it. But when I think back to my job history, I was the manager. A director was the next level. So that would be, in my opinion, falsifying a title. But they're saying that that's, this article, and I've seen others, that you do that because it sounds better. And that's what people are calling managers these days. What are your thoughts on, one, someone writing an article like that? Two, what if someone actually actioned that?
Wordsmithing is something that you got to evaluate yourself. We talked about semantics, because there might be some job somewhere that a director and manager is the same thing. But you got to be able to justify it, and always remember that if you are called upon, you're going to have to explain that. And is it something that could potentially cost you a job? When I started in marketing, I was talking to someone and I saw their title and it said CEO of their company. And CEO sounds so cool. And I'm like, oh, you're incorporated. This. No, I just use that title. Sounds good. I started realizing instead of, and people can go back and look, mine says owner operator until I did get incorporated. Now, Kristin, I would like for you to call me CEO if you don't mind.
I'm president on my filing.
But no, it truly is. People are constantly wordsmithing to make themselves look better. And I appreciate what you said. And I used to tell people all the time, they would go, it's an internship, but it's not paid. I said, if you can survive, go do it. So many jobs happen when you do an internship. They get to know you, they like you, and then they hire you. When you're finished with your degree or whatever the situation is. So that's how you build that rapport and those connections. So it really does frustrate me when people, and I get it, if you can't survive, you can't pay your rent, that's a different story. But you would be surprised how many people will let you intern for free if you're willing to do it.
Yeah, exactly. And believe me, if it's free, they'll be flexible on when you're able to do it. They're not going to expect you to be there during peak work hours.
So, Kristin, I just wanted to end by saying, if you're an employer, trust but verify. I think we've heard that before. You got to make those phone calls. Yeah. And then if you are working on your resume, think about long-term consequences. Can I justify this? Can I explain this? And just like Kristin said, start building your resume now so that you don't have to get in a situation where you are not going to get the job because you didn't pad your resume like some other people did. There's so many ways to do that. Get a job with DoorDash, and
yes,
it's going to make everything better.
I think I'm so glad you said wordsmith. That just brought back memories because we used to, my last job, we wrote letters. We formulated letters on behalf of corporate, and we were always like wordsmith this, right? Like that was like our next level. We would send it to each other. But it is really important. I think that, something that what you said inspired me on, Ron, is the fact that we can take a peek at our resume and our true accomplishments, and we can wordsmith what it is trying to, basically what we've done can apply to so many jobs, but you want to wordsmith it to make sure it aligns with what you're applying for. So you want to think about what the hiring manager is looking for. It doesn't mean you don't have that skill. You're not lying about a skill, but you are wordsmithing how your skill was utilized to maybe dress it up to where it makes more sense for this role you're applying for. And I'm not really, I don't have one on the tip of my tongue that I can walk through, but if you're applying to be a CPA or an accountant, you're going to talk numbers, right? You're going to talk about actual history that has to do with that. And maybe what you did was retail banking and you worked a ton of numbers and you were doing that while you were going to school, but you're going to adjust that. You're going to shift that work, that skill set that you built over to the accounting, but you truly built it and it was utilized one way. You're going to shift it. You're going to wordsmith it and shift it over to what you're going for. So, and that is not an embellishment. That is just being smart and adjusting your writing for the reader.
Yeah, a good safe space is strong interpersonal skills. You've interacted with people your whole life, so you can easily justify that. Even if you were a cashier at McDonald's, I mean, you can put strong interpersonal skills or customer service skills, those kind of things. So anyway, yeah, we may get into a resume podcast sometime, but guys, we hope you enjoyed this. We want you to get that career that you want. but do it ethically, and certainly don't want to be called on the carpet for something you put in there that you can't justify. All right, everybody, have a great week. Be the leader you're meant to be.
We'll see you next week.
The Dirty Side of Leadership podcast is brought to you by Forward Operations. If you'd like to book Ron or Kristin for speaking events, training, or executive coaching, visit forwardoperations.com. Be the leader you're meant to be.